panelists introduce themselves, starting from the left.
She heard, good luck everybody.
Neva, good luck.
Ben, good luck everyone.
Natasha, she heard, good luck.
Excellent. And we'll just go team by teams, getting name, speaking order, and preferred gender pronouns. And if you could state in the introduction if you consent to being recorded. And starting off with opening government.
Myra speaking first, she, her. And Parth speaking second, they now I consent to recording.
St. Andrews!
Yeah.
Opening opposition.
Sorry, Myra, do you consent?
Andy first. He, him, I, yeah, please record.
Rob second, he, him, I consent.
Closing government.
William speaking first, I consent.
Andy speaking second.
St. Andrews!
And closing opposition.
Adam first, I consent to recording.
Ellie second, consent to recording.
Eddie! Oi! Guys!
Lovely. And this is an old room, which means it's also an echoey room. So speakers, just make sure you're projecting your voice as much as you can, and also audience, keep the talking to an absolute minimum. And if you need to leave the chamber for any reason, please make sure it's between speeches, unless you're like dying, basically. So as not to disturb the speakers, show them the respect that they deserve to be in the final. Without further ado, then I'd like to open the speech.
First of all, I'm going to provide some framing. Why this is likely to be implemented well, why is there no comparative advantage, and what are the biological, psychological impacts of this. First of all, note that severance is likely to be implemented well because governments have a lot of incentive to create a productive workforce. And note that this severance is uniquely important in making this production because they want them to maximize their productivity by centering their focus and attention into their work and their work only instead of getting distracted by everything else, which is something that governments will focus on, which means that they have incentive to make this being implemented well. But also at the same time, they also don't want people to bite back at them. So they're probably going to have reasonable lunch breaks and maybe some informational breaks to have access to the outside world. Second of all, because of the biological and psychological modifications you do to the person in the first place, it means that they're likely to, for this to be implemented, they're likely to already have a lot of ethical boards or ethical reviews that have certain ethical oversight because of how much intrusion you do to a person. Like, you are changing my mind, it's something that makes me unique, and there's some ethical, yes.
This is a prefers a world motion. This is implemented from the beginning of time, not just states. They cannot use all of this regulation to make it work well.
Yes, but note that the development of ethical bounds, it does not relate to this uniquely. The development of ethical is just respecting a human person in general. I feel like this would be development in human civilization in general, and I don't think this matters. Third of all, there is no comparative advantage in the sense that everyone is going to have to be regulated. Note that we think that capitalism is likely to exist on both sides of the house. First of all, in terms of human evolutionary process, people by nature want to make things better, and they want to improve themselves, which means they're constantly looking for processes to make things or produce better things. Second of all, by nature, humans are collective beings, which means they want to work together to produce better things in general. What this means is that you're going to create some advancement or technological advancement that's going to create more diverse products. What this means is that then my demands become more diverse, and I need some sort of medium exchange to make that exchange to get to exchange for different types of things that I want. Which means that economic development is going to happen in terms of creating a certain similar medium of exchange. That capitalism is just natural with the process of natural industrialization, technological development, that I want to invest my capital in more capital. This is just a natural thinking of human beings with the development of technology and industrialization. We think that this is symmetric. This is important because we think that capitalism is natural development, but also this is very psychologically damaging capitalism relies on having like a stable workforce, that everyone works together to produce something for a better good. But why is capitalism being criticized? Its biggest criticism is what it does to the individuals in general. Note that the reason capitalism in the status quo is good in terms of the productive results, but it's bad for the individual. Crucially because of how people are linking their identity with the work in the first place. Because A, you very likely spend a lot of time in the workplace because government want to maximize productivity, and you will have to spend required to spend a lot of time in the workplace to earn a certain kind of wage, which develop things like performance targets, things like having best KPI, or you're constantly wanting to compare yourself with other groups or to fight for a better performance target, or people are going to get you together to fight for like a better something concrete, or just having like more education makes a more competitive workforce, or just like just this develops into like a competitive mindset by linking identity with work. This is uniquely damaging in the sense that you don't actually have time to think for yourself outside of work. Note that this does not only limit to the workforce, because when you connect your identity to work, because so much time and effort it takes up, literally your entire your living situation, quality of life depends on it uniquely, that you always feel like you're part of a production chain in general. You don't have any independence because everything you produce is for the company. It is what you do is not part of yourself. It is not your product. It's part of a company. It's part of someone else. You don't feel your independence. It's also draining that every day you wake up and I go to work and I die. That's your entire life. Okay. So even after work hours, you're still going to think I have to go to work tomorrow. I have one weekend relax. But you know what? Guess what? It's work again. So this means that this kind of thought process also intrudes into your life outside of work. But also, third of all, you kind of just feel detached from yourself and your independent thinking in general, because of the sense that I just told you. Very realistically, what this manifests into in the real life is that it damages your interpersonal relationships. That you already don't have the mental energy to text the people you love. You already feel very tired after work, and you don't want to make that effort to spend time or go to pubs or bars because you're already very mentally tired to do so. Note that this is very different from being physically tired in the sense that probably you're just spending your whole time texting or like using a computer. That's not physically draining or exhausting. That is just mentally taxing, that you don't have the energy. Whereas with Severance, the comparative here is that you detach yourself from that tired feeling mentally because you already forget everything that you are doing in that workplace, which means that the mentally taxing thing is already removed when you're outside of the workforce, which means that even if you still get the limited amount of hours afterward, you're able to maximally utilize it to things that you care about, things that you want to do, things like texting people you love, pairing people you love, hanging out with people you love. These are things that you're only able to prioritize when you don't always think about work and how mentally exhausted you are.
Are you generally allowed to sleep at work?
No, well, I'm not generally led to speak at work, but I feel like shirking is very much of a thing in general. I'm not sure what that POI is. Anyway, what I'm saying is, I feel what I'm saying is it builds up interpersonal relationship and just helps men's different relationship, and also it also just in general leads to things like mental illness or things like depression because of the draining of your own individuality and the agency and the time you have for yourself to do things you care about, because a large chunk of the time is already spent at work, and in after hours you're still thinking about work, and that's mentally draining. Not that the comparison is, even if they can argue that it's very destabilizing and get some less productive results, we think that the ultimate goal of getting more material benefits is to make people happy, is to give people's life more meaning. The material stuff that you actually get produced from capitalism, the ultimate goal is to make people's lives better. And we think that it's more important that you get the agency and individualism mentally than you actually get from the material life, crucially because I feel like all material life satisfy you ultimately for the spiritual life. But also know that things that people care the most about, things like integrity, values, or things like religion, all this stuff focuses on people's purposes of life and how much they care about their own individual spiritual life in general. These are things that tells you that it makes you own individual person, but also it's linked to the thoughts of eternity. These are things that matter the most to a person spiritually, because having material life is it's just an addition to fulfill this, or a mechanism to fulfill this, and we feel like the way that this is getting taken away by capitalism is how this works out. And we feel like this can fix it even in the situation. You still get a lot of material benefits from the capitalism because you're a more productive force, but at the same time you can maximize the time that you have in private. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech, and I invite the Leader of Opposition to open the debate today.
Ireland.
For a technology that existed since the beginning of time, they must acknowledge that the first job was the warmonger and the prostitute. The issue which they must deal with on government is that what happens is that, one, productivity is unable to happen because people are so psychologically scarred from the way this technology interacts with their life, their brain chemistry, their body, and their means of surviving. And secondly, they make war far worse, leading to far more deaths on their side. First, two pieces of framing. One, they must stand over this being used in every instance. They talk about capitalism in like the 21st century. This is the minority of experiences for most people throughout humanity. It might be the majority of experiences in the show, but it's not the majority of experiences throughout history. The second thing to say is that, as they explain, capitalist pressures force you to work really hard on both sides and give you burnout and an inability to live your best life on both sides. Rob flags you're unable to live your best life outside of work because you have to sleep, which means you can't cultivate your personality. That means that the clash they hinge themselves on is massively symmetric. It has some impact, but it is quite low impact in comparison to what we're going to do. Yes?
In this house prefers the world, I wish to see that won the 2024 general election. Do we go back to 0 AD in this motion?
This is the reason why this doesn't make sense is because this assumes that there's a point where this technology has to exist. This technology does not exist. It's a magical technology. It could have feasibly been implemented at any point throughout history. There's no reason they give you for how it would be implemented. And even if it's implemented in the modern day, we're willing to stand over that and still win, because both of our arguments exist in that frame. It's just a burden pushed them quite substantially. They have to defend the entire scope of this motion. First, on societal trauma. Note, things in work affect you when you are not in work. You have severe burnout and you pick up injuries in manual labor and things like this. There are three reasons why this happens largely. First, most of jobs in human history, but even right now in countries which are not developed with large tertiary sectors, have tended to be manual, have tended to have a large amount of labor, which wears you down and makes you feel pain. Your joints hurt. You feel agony. You're unable to get up when you're 50 because your back has been blown out over a long period of time. Note, this is things like farming, which is made up by the majority of the global workforce. Secondly, things like sanitation and workplace safety are just often not invested into, particularly for lower income people. The reason why is they do not have the political capital or economic power in order to lobby for better conditions. The third thing to say is that violence and abuse against people in the workplace is common. Things like sexual harassment against women within the workplace. Things like just creeps and angry leaders who are willing to hit their employees now but also throughout history. Note, it is easier to do this on Gov for two reasons. A, you cannot whistleblow. The reason why is because when you leave, you've forgotten what happened in work. The implication is you cannot call out the person directly who has done this to you, and you can never know. But B, you do not have access to strong information or an ability to store this, historically because there was no access to internet, but also now we would say that companies preemptively try to restrict the way in which people are able to speak out. For instance, you stop people who are working in your production lines from being able to talk to anyone from outside of that factory. What is the implication of this then? First, there is no amelioration on their side of the house against the worst harms that are done to people. Note, they're going to say that people are unable to stand up against things that are done against them on either side. This is untrue. You're able to talk to people in your personal life and family. You're able to try to communicate to the media in some way. You're able to go to the police. Even if it doesn't work all the time, there's some scope for efficacy on our side, but there is none on theirs. That means they trap people in cycles of terrible work for a long period of time. Second, it leads to feelings of dread, doubt, and uncertainty, because you don't know what happened to you. When you have pain in your side or your back hurts, that can either be a heavy load or a sexual assault. That can be something you're never able to know the pain and actually be able to close that loop. It is absolutely agonizing to wake up in the morning not knowing what happened to you last night and never be able to know what's going to happen to you the next night because you have no agency over this meat sack that you have to live the rest of your life in. It is something which we're unable to escape because we cannot get out of our own perspective. We are stuck there no matter whether we like it or not. This becomes severe and reciprocal for a few reasons. A, you assume the worst. The reason for this is preferential for your survival into the future to try to insulate against the worst case. It means your mind is always playing tricks on you, telling you what if a terrible thing happened to you. Even if you have a small ache or a pain, what if that was somebody who assaulted you? What if it was somebody who tried to harm you? B, doubt and inability to close the loop means that you're in an uncanny valley effect. You may have nightmares. You may have these sorts of things where you're unable to figure out what was dream and what was reality, and you might think that you're able to experience some bits from inside of this different severance. But thirdly, there's an information asymmetry, because there are people who are not in your workplace, who are in your personal life, but you don't know when you walk inside the workplace. So, this is when somebody goes to the hospital, and someone comes in claiming to be their wife, but you have no fucking clue who that is, and you don't know whether that's somebody you you actually love or somebody who's trying to exploit you. It leads to when you're outside of the workplace, you wonder, do people around me know things that I don't? Do they understand what happened to me yesterday and why aren't they willing to fill me in? This means you lean on other people massively heavily in your life, and you also act in a way which means you're unable to feel a degree of satisfaction. This dominates your mind. This is the continuity of existence is something that exists in all living creatures, not just humans. And if they want to frame it so this happens in like 2020, this is even more salient, because we're so used to the idea of knowing ourselves one day after the next. Now we have to deal with the fact that I don't know who I was yesterday. I don't know who I'll be tomorrow night. That's something we're unable to escape. 3 impacts. 1, there's a constant dread and terror that you cannot adjust to. 2, scope for abuse. And 3, you push people over the edge, which means they might do things like opt out and stuff like this. We would also note that things like that this weighing comes prior to any productivity or joy in your work. Because if you're constantly in dread, you're unable to do any of the things that opening government want to talk about. Second case on war, before that to CG, yeah.
So can you explain why not knowing what happened is worse than knowing you could have done something better?
Because you think that you can change it into the future and people don't like to feel powerless over what's going to happen to them in their lives. Learned helplessness, which is absolutely reciprocal and damning, is something which we are, we'd rather like die on our feet trying to fight to a better life for ourselves, to resign ourselves to being a prisoner to our own body and somebody else who climbs into it. On war, firstly, it's easier to recruit people for 2 reasons. A, there's less information on what happens outside of your military, but therefore there's less inside your military, therefore there's less scrutiny on the bad practices that happen, there's less whistleblowing. 2, you don't know other armies and groups because they're not able to whistleblow either. Consequently, you do not know how bad they're doing, what they're planning on. Therefore, fear-mongering can crop up whereby you say that they're weapons of mass destruction being held by other nations, which are unable to ever check against. Secondly, people do things like war crimes more. 3 reasons. A, it's easier to fear-monger about what the enemy is doing. You can say they've kidnapped your family, they're going to kidnap you in the morning when you try to go home from work. All of these sorts of things are things that terrify you and make you try to fight harder against people you otherwise would not. B, you don't have to feel the same guilt on our side of the house. When you commit something atrocious in war, that haunts you for the rest of your life. But not the case on their side of the house, which means you're more willing to do it in the first instance. You're convinced rationally as a soldier in Vietnam to gun down a village in the My Lai massacre, or as somebody who is in Ukraine at the moment to do it over against Russians. Note, the third thing is you make it just easier to do because they work harder on their side of the house, because it's easier to keep them in systems of abuse and also to indoctrinate them within their workplace to believe the war is the highest value. Consequently, you're just in the field more. You have more weapons being created and stuff like this. The impact is massive scale of people being killed. I do not want to be a slave in my own body. I will not be a zombie within my own mind. We're very proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for that fine speech and invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue.
I'm going to give 2 pieces of framing which severely mitigate the lead of the opposition's argumentation. Because whilst it might sound nice and the government bench may necessarily have a higher burden in this debate, it should not just be taken for granted that there's just good and bad things that are happening. The first is the POI and clarification that I gave. In this House of First World, when Rishi Sunak won the 2024 general election, we go back to 2024. In a motion which is this House of First World about mobile phones, we go back to 1980s or the 1990s. We're not going fucking back to 0 AD. This is about 2020. Then they say the technology doesn't exist. Right, this house prefers a world with an experienced machine. This house prefers a world with X technology, etc. You have to presume that technology fucking exists or there's no fucking debate. So I don't understand the LO's push that, oh wow, this technology doesn't exist, so you can't do anything at all. And I think this is really, really important. So what is likely the case is that this is a very recent thing. It's happened in the last couple of months, it's happened in the last couple of years, because of the advancements of biology and neuroscience and stuff like that. We don't know how to isolate different parts of the brain, because the brain is very complicated. We don't know all of the things that the brain can do and how it can do the things that it's doing. In other words, it's just fucking impossible for it to be done in 0 AD. You can't fucking inject someone in the fucking brain in 0 AD, and you can't do these things in the first place. This is just a very recent thing. And this is the first world notion. You don't have to go back decades or eons and stuff like that. Right, so now, with this framing being true, I just honestly think this is not something that can be contested, why is this going to mitigate a lot of the arguments? The first on just communication to the media, police, and rise up. The first thing is just that, let's just take their case at this best and say this is true. There's likely to be a collective action problem on their side of the house too, because often they're not able to rise up effectively against certain industries in the first place, because if this is in recent times, often this is likely to be done through the poorer individuals who have the least amount of agency, the least amount of capacity to do these things, and often they're likely to be in countries where there's likely to be no regulation, they can't fight the state in the first place because they don't have the agency to have trade unions. Thank you, William. They don't have the agency to have trade unions. Trade unions don't exist, for example. There's like very autocratic states, etc. So I don't think this is actually particularly comparative. But let's take them at their best and say this is going to happen everywhere. Rich people also have to be severed, right? Politicians also have to be severed. Their best friends also have to be severed. Therefore, there is an incentive to make sure your friend is okay. Therefore, you pass legislation as a politician or as a rich person to make sure that everyone is okay, because it looks bad to have a policy which is really obviously unequal before you'll be voted out in the next election cycle, because you're obviously likely to have a good implementation of this in the first place. But also, just to mitigate this as well, if it is 2025 and it's happening right now, etc., then a lot of the whistleblowing, a lot of the bad forms of practices, like, I don't know, people not having gloves in developing countries in the first place to deal with chemicals and stuff like that, probably would already have happened, because there's a lot of labour laws being improved in the status quo, and there's lots of left-wing movements and social movements rising up in the first place. This is not actually a big impact in the round. No. Right. So, and then on war crimes and weapons, this also severely mitigates all of their impacts, because it's also going to be like just laws about what is a just war. There's obviously going to be things about like there's going to be protections in international law existing. But obviously, this is going to be symmetric issues. Because if a politician, if a dictator wants to invade a country, they will do it symmetrically because they are rationally incentivized to do it because of ethnic tensions and things like that. They're going to do this symmetrically on both sides of the house. Then let's finally weigh off the dread claim and literally explain why this is completely unintuitive to the average London voter. And even if the severance thing is just so weird to the audience, this could be a thing that we could ever conceive of. Look, most people wake up. They go think of the intuition of being in a breakup, and you are now like no longer in a relationship, you're single. You want to forget that relationship ever happened. You want to believe that that thing could not have happened in the first place, or something bad happened to you. You want to wish that thing that never fucking happened to you in the first place. Most people would rather forget their experiences than actually have to relive all of the trauma that they have fucking faced in the first place. This is a fucking intuitive premise, and most people don't have the capacity to rationally deal with these things, and it causes massive amounts of psychological harm. But also, this has long-term path dependency effects, i.e., this is likely to impact your future decision-making, i.e., you might change your preferences about who you want to be in the relationship because of the path, because of the fact that you've actually been in a worse relationship in the first place. It may also cloud your judgment about the type of person you want to interact with in the future. You may think of that person badly, etc. All of these things means you don't actually want to go through these things, and the physical trauma is likely to be much, much worse. I'd rather the bruise on my arm and not know where that bruise came from than actually have to relive the actual thing about it. Would you rather get hit on the head or just have the bruise afterwards? It causes massive physical pain, literal physical pain, to actually go through the fact that you've been hit by chemical. When you are 7 and you come out, that pain will just be numbed or it will be less. This is just so obvious that people avoid pain. It's a biological imperative to do so. So I think that is exactly why people would be happy doing this thing in the first place. Let me then explain why this was a very flippant response to say that burnout was symmetric, because I think Myra was already pretty clear about this. It spills over into your life. You will not be able to know what happened in the workplace. Of course burnout's not fucking symmetric, because you're two different people, basically, which means you're not going to be able to face these things in the first place. So they have to do a better job of responding to this claim in the first place. Eli, your POI.
Yes. Does a dog think that it's a mouse?
Right, well, whenever you're in this chamber, you're always in Sierra and run some principles. I look forward to this principle coming out. Good, and I genuinely look forward to hearing this in the first place. Okay, right, so this means, I think Myra's explained sufficiently. So I explained sufficiently why people who go through trauma, work issues where they have to feel like they're being pushed to the bone, especially vulnerable people who work in factories, who have been forced to work long hours, face massive amounts of exhaustion. This is way more common than someone being burnt or like having physical damage or being bruised on their side of the house. It's way more common to have more mental exhaustion than it is to have more physical pain in the first place, which means it's much, much better if we're able to stop them feeling like this in the first place. The response could be, well, if you work a 9 to 9, you don't have many times when you come out of the severance, right? But you spend more time, you have an active incentive to work out, to spend more time with people, because you can't text your friend at work. You can't text the outside self. So you actually have lower interactions on outside the house with people. Therefore, you try and make more time with people. You don't go to the pub. You may go out to do a hike. You may do more socially utile things which are more personal to you and beneficial to you in the first place. In the last 30 seconds, I've come up with something that I think closing government's going to run, so I'm going to try and turf out this, but probably won't do this enough. The advancement of this technology is a good thing, because it means that we found the technology to isolate memories in the first place. We know about how the brain is likely to operate more, which means we have more information about how the brain operates. This is massive for neuroscience surgeries. This is massive for being able to understand how the brain works in the first place. And then you can actually isolate trauma. You can isolate where stress comes from. You can isolate depression, which means you can deal with these things more clearly on our side of the house, because you know where it's specifically coming from. This means that when there are non-work-life stresses, when there are physical stresses in your outer self, you'll know how to deal with this better. Because you can come up with therapy, you can come up with drugs, you can come up with injections which actually deal with these things, because you actually know where these things are coming from. So you can make people's lives better. This may seem like this crazy policy to implement, but don't let our benches go away with just saying, everything's going to be shit, because it's not going to be. Open government.
Let me get to Prime Minister for that speech, and I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to finish off with the talk.
I'm going to respond to what the DPM has said, and I'm going to move on and, win the debate. So, first of all, on the idea of collective action being a problem on our side of the house. Yes, we acknowledge that collective action is a problem on our side of the house. However, it is much easier to deal with problems and abuses within the workplace when you're able to recall what has actually happened in that workplace. I.e., you are able to write reports, you're able to submit things to the police. I'm going to deal with why it is the case it is unjust to punish people for how they act in the workplace anyway if they are a different person, which is like something I think that might come out of CO. But what I think is important to note here is that it just is a barrier to entry to not be able to remember what happens within the workplace and also not being able to explain the actual ongoings of your life. The second thing is that they say that there is going to be a huge amount of regulation that is going to ensure that the way this is implemented is going to be good. The mechanisms that they give here is that politicians will also have to be undergoing this machine, which means that they are going to want to protect themselves. Be so for real. Like, literally, politicians have rules that then they don't have to make poor people who are being paid below minimum wage actually receive the proper wage which they have implemented. A lot of the countries in the world that try and implement policies just don't have the capacity to actually implement those regulations to the highest degree, accessing our highest scale of impact that Pandya outlines. And if you are to weigh on the context and the frame in which we push forward, then that is also just a huge scale of people that has existed within the world. So I'm not sure that necessarily politicians having an incentive to protect themselves is going to protect the most vulnerable people within society, or even the people who just work within workplaces that don't actually enforce the regulation to the highest degree. The second thing then is that we think that it is unfair, even if it is the case that you are able to actually understand who it is that has committed that crime in the workplace, to punish that person who has committed that crime, given that they are a different person with a different personality and with different understandings of the world. They themselves do not choose to take that action because they themselves are a different individual to the one who is on the outside world. However, once they are not in the workplace, they then are being punished for the actions that they took in the workplace. So you're throwing someone in prison who has not committed any wrong. So we think that then it just becomes incredibly difficult to ever actually find justice for the individuals or retribution for the individuals who have been harmed in the first place. We think that this means that there is a lack of justice on their side of the house, and something that we should really not like. Thirdly, war as symmetric. They say that war is symmetric because on both sides of the house people are going to be able to ensure that, like, if somebody wants to invade, then they will invade. But I think what's important to note here is that it is much easier to commit war crimes when people aren't afraid of themselves actually being punished for those war crimes, insofar as they don't remember or won't know what will happen to them on the outside world. But the second reason is the one that Andy gave, which is it becomes much easier to motivate an individual. If you don't know where your family is, you believe that you have somebody that you are connected with, but now you're unable to know whether or not they're going to be safe or not safe unless you actually commit that war crime. We think that this is something, or even just to like act in a really bloody, irrational way because you know you won't have to deal with the consequences, or you at least are told that you won't have to deal with the consequences of you performing that act in your regular life. We think that what this means is that just even if it is the case that war is symmetric, we think it is bloodier, we think it is more harmful, and we think it just becomes something that is harder for individuals. And thank you. Finally, on the mental burnout, which on their side of the house, that they claim means that you're able to get better access to life as something that is enjoyable and good. I pointed out in my POI that if it is the case that your joints are hurting, you have put through a huge day of manual labour, you likely are going to have a physical reaction to that insofar as you have to sleep, you have to eat. So doing all of the things that are enjoyable are actually relegated to your daily life where you're supposed to get the enjoyment from it. We think that what this means is that you aren't just creating one life that is happy and one life that is sad. Both one life is miserable and one life is dedicated to substantiating the body in which you live that you don't recognise because of the things that you've had to do with it that you don't remember. We think that what this means is you're just living in an eternal damnation of horribleness. We think that we are able to access far better things on our side of the house and when we're able to just live in the world in which we live in and access these individuals. But before I move on, I'll take closing.
So do you think memories are actually a form or part of your body or a part of somebody else's body?
Okay, like see Trinity Ivy final last week, because I think that kind of answers a few of those questions. But I'm going to talk a bit about why it's the case that, and sort of more substantiate the idea that Andy gave in response to what we heard out of OG in relation to your body being damaged and your body not feeling like your own as the highest level of impact, but then how that also flows into all of the other levels of impact that we get. The analogy here is that it might feel normal for individuals once they've gone through this for a long period of time that they don't recognize their body because they feel the pains that they haven't seen. However, what is also normal is the gender dysphoria that I feel every day. For me, that is a normal feeling that I experience, but it doesn't differentiate the fact that that is still a horrible experience that I don't want to have to experience, and if I could get around that I wouldn't want to feel it. We say that it is extremely distressing and something that even if you are used to it, is something that people don't have to experience and something that we don't want them to have to interact with. The way that the human body also responds to hurt and shock and all of the damage that can be done is basic down to chemistry, whereby you are still going to feel the hormones and the emotions that come along with the feeling of looking at your arm and seeing that there is a big cut on it and you don't realise how you got there. Yes?
So these are all very valid examples of war crimes, gender dysphoria. I completely agree. Do you not think it's more common for there to be more mental exhaustion than physical taxation and all of these other things? The vast majority of the people in this world, therefore we win on scale still.
No, because Andy literally explained to you why most people interact with things in manual labour, whereby they are literally putting their body through horrible events in order to farm, in order to work in factories and an industry, in order to create things for people, and that is still mentally anguishing, but now I'm going to explain why the comparative is better. The first is that you increase the amount of misery based on utility on their side of the house. Insofar as one individual's whole life is literal misery, and you can't get around the fact that that individual's life is just entirely misery, because when they're in work, they can't think about their friends, they can't think about their loved ones, and so any shining light within their life is gone. Secondarily, you need peaks and valleys in order to ensure that you are able to contextualize the joy that you feel within your life. That is to say that you are, when you get home from work and you lay on the couch and you feel the relaxation of your muscles, you know that that was because you were carrying something for a long period of time, and you are able to know that that is a relief. On our side of the house, you can't contextualize why you're hurt to begin with, and that is the only thing you can think about. Secondarily, you are able to gain more experiences, you are able to experience more relationships and understand how those relationships interact with you as a person. Finally though, you are physically tired, and this is the most important thing I think. You have to spend your whole time sleeping and living in order to substantiate your body for an experience that you will never remember and never understand. We think that we're able to win on all levels. If you weigh on our own metric in regards to all of humanity, we clearly win this debate. We also win on their metric.
I thank the Executive Leader of Opposition for that fine speech, and I invite the Member of Government to open the
Everybody borrowed it in Panama, and I returned it to him here, and then everybody was borrowed again.
I think memories are a fundamentally different person that haunts you every single day of the week. I also think it's a memory that is coercive to you in ways it changes what you actually want to do, makes you believe as if you want to do something different, and therefore fundamentally doesn't allow you to make a decision that is representative of your agency. I'm running a principle along with some consequential impacts, so this is more fun than what I think happened on Parth. Over opening government, there will be consequential impacts within the speech that way above certainty and scale of opening government. I also think I'm willing to accept that this is an organic phenomenon like sleep, which is what I thought the debate was about, as in this is just a fundamental nature of humanity now. So I'm willing to have a better defense and challenge against opening opposition than opening government did. The first claim I'm going to make is why removal of memory is a reparation to bodily autonomy. What I want you to be convinced of at the end of this is memories are not a type of your body. They're not a physical aspect of your current form. They're a parasite, like a disease that is upon your body that you cannot get rid of, and it is therefore a hindrance to your bodily autonomy, not a position of it. I want to give this through some intuitions. The first is an example of dissociation. When you experience memories, what memories are is a recall of an experience you had when you were younger, when you were fundamentally a different individual with different values, and you internalize those memories of what that experience was. It might have been an authentic memory, but it's a memory of an event that no longer exists, that continues to haunt you. The intuition here is PTSD, right? When you have an event that happens to you, your brain often maladapts what actually happened and makes you overestimate what had actually happened that was bad rather than good. It distorts your lens of perspective about what future events would be, and therefore coercively changes your preference decisions. As in, you make wrong decisions now because you have the wrong information, because your memory of a person that is not you is coercing you. Recognize you can't opt out of memories. People spend their entire life, in some cases end their lives, because of an inability to escape the memories of their past, of the haunting of the lies, of the mistakes they made. This is something that is fundamental to human nature. Granted, I can't get rid of everybody's memory, right? This isn't the motion. But it's better that I allow someone some breathing room sometimes, where they don't experience the bad memory of work, as well as the bad memory of their personal life. They don't have to experience one or the other. Some aspect of reparation is better, even if it's not complete reparation. The second I want to say is actually in response to war crimes. Recognize most people who commit war crimes are pawns of the war. They have no decision making on whether or not they actually did kill that person. In some ways they were coerced to do so, because if they didn't do it, somebody else would have shot that person and shot their own family. It's better that person never has to remember the fact, never has to contemplate their own decision making, and never has to have that memory baked upon them to make the same mistakes over and over again. Considering that we have a net negative bias as an individual, this is why I'm interacting with the POI that came with Andy. I love the response from Andy because they concede the principle framework, which is what you actually value is the control of yourself. So the clash on short diagonal is, what is self? Is it the encapsulation of memory and personhood, or is it who you are actually now? Trivially, it's who you are actually now, because that's the person making an agentic decision. This concedes, therefore, anything that allows you to have more agency of the decisions you make now, removing you from other decision making that may influence you negatively, is actually how you gain the control of self. The second response to opening government is, you might end up thinking or speculating in ways that directly harm you, right? You might not know what happened to you that night, and therefore that coerces your decision. Quite trivially, it's actually not trivially, I think it's at least very true to me. It is far better to think that something could have happened to you, rather than have the memory that thing that actually did happen to you. It is inescapable in instances of assault to be able to know to be able to imagine something that was different. It places not just the harm of you had that experience, but the blame upon yourself. To not being able to escape that experience is something that I think constrains your agency even more. Do you have a response to that, Parth?
Memories also give you control of yourself by being able to plan for the future and benchmark. You have the same amount of memories on both sides, except you only have the bad memories that are instrumentally
So
bad.
this is the second part. I'm going to explain why the bad memories are more likely to make bad decisions, to have them give you bad information, and therefore make bad decisions as a product of this. This is therefore the second product of this, which is this should be sufficient to demonstrate that memories are really something different from you, something unlike you, and something that is something bad and we should remove it from you. Recognize I'm not removing it entirely, you still get access to them when you go back to work, which means I don't think any consent violation arguments is as important as the reparations of consent I'm giving an individual now, if closing opposition wishes to run that for an extension, which I hope you do. In terms of memories being bad, I want to first argue this on a principle level, which is why you have the right to control over yourself, and therefore, even if the consequences are bad, you should be able to make those bad decisions. Thank Owen for the round one way. Recognize the way in which we arbitrate who can and can't make decisions for individuals is whether or not we think they have the best interests at heart. Not of the future of that person, but that person as they represent. So we give parents the choice of what happens to their kids, not because the parents are smarter, but because we believe parents are best able to give children their agency, and children are less able to do that for themselves, because maybe they don't understand that much. This is where I think Andy's POI comes in correctly, which just means the arbitration of agency comes about access to information. I have 5 reasons to why memories are likely to give you bad access to information, and rather on the comparative, just looking at information that happens now is likely more accurate. I'll give you a second chance here.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like your argument's actually a principle. It's that memories are coercive. You have memories on both sides, but bad memories coerce you. So you're going to be better because you have good memories. But that's just an instrumental argument about which side has more good or bad memories.
It's still a good argument because of the scale of applicability to it. I also think I just gave you the principal reason about agency and autonomy, but you didn't have to engage that if you didn't want to. Recognize that here are 5 reasons why I think the memories are consequentially bad. 1, you can't control a memory. It is something that is not organic. You can't say, I wish to forget this. Because every time you try to forget a memory, it usually reinforces it in your own mind. This is actually just true neuroscience. The reevaluation of it potentiates the synapses within your brain, which makes it easier to fire the potential and therefore easier to remember it if you needed a fucking structured reason for that. Just try to remember something like that time that you were really embarrassed in front of school, in front of your school friends when you were 2. This memory keeps coming back to you because you keep thinking about it over and over again and potentiate it, even if it's very minor. Second, it causes a massive adrenaline response. When you have a memory, the moment you remember something, your body doesn't actually recognize it's not currently happening to you. This doesn't just happen in PTSD with all forms of memory. When your heart races when you remember, the eyes of your lover, or the sex you had that was really good, or the fact that one day you were assaulted one day, and this causes a massive adrenaline reaction within you. This shapes you as a person that you can't control. You can't tell your adrenal glands not to release adrenaline. You feel that pumping system around you, and this changes the way you make decisions now. Thirdly, the memories are just not true. You can reinterpret and reevaluate memories to create false memories within your own mind. There's no biological mechanism that prevents this. The way in here is your memories are likely to do this anyway. Their memories are trying to prevent harm to you, so they're wanting to be risk adverse, which is why biology has evolved individuals to remember net negative memories and remember them more severely. This is providing therefore an incorrect balance of what the world actually looks like, making you mistaking the memories of it. The fourth is oftentimes memories are uncommutable, as in you can't explain to people why it's bad, and therefore there's no remediation about an external actor. That's why therapy in some ways doesn't work, as it's an actor of someone else trying to understand your mind that you don't understand yourself. The end point of this, and this is the 5th claim, all you have to be convinced of to give Cullian government the win is that you're better able to be authentic to your preferences you have now, to be less coerced by somebody else. And this is a fundamental reparation, both consequentially and principally, for everybody, irrespective of what the frame setting of this debate is. This was a fun speech if it doesn't win.
Member of government for that fine speech, and I invite the member of opposition to continue the back path.
Go Adam!
I am Irish. I am Hell yes. Because I have both flags, that means I win. The worst possible thing that you can do to a person is make them no longer a person. To strip away all their rights and all their dignity, to turn them into a fucking object. The instrumentalization of a person, not just any person, but a person who you have created, is the winning case in this debate. Given that Top Hat does not explicitly try to justify utility as a metric, we'll justify our metric, putting us in direct path with CG, we'll also beat them. Emma and Kate, you're going to have some intense deja vu here, but listen out, because this time we are rewriting the ending. So, versus CG, what I will flag before I begin is that Eli has plenty more to come, but the initial thing I would say is William is very happy to take away memories of work to give the outside self more agency, but I think he has genuinely no regard for the agency of the work person and the person inside there, for whom we can weigh on quite easily and say that they lose all of their agency entirely, and so if agency is the most important thing in this debate, we will also win on that. Let's talk about what instrumentalization is first of all. Conceptually, it is turning a human being who has inherent rights and dignity by virtue of being a human, as we believe that all humans do, into a machine instead of a human. It is someone not just being harmed or not being used as a means to an end, but specifically being used as a mere means to an end, being used as nothing else whatsoever other than just a means to an end. So to illustrate the difference here, using someone as a means to an end in a way that is not this is me and Eli this weekend. Because Ellie is my friend and also a great debater, right? But we're a team not just because I want to do well at this competition, although I recognize that speaking with Ellie is a way to do well at this competition, but also because they're my friend and I like to speak with them and if it's fun. If we were to use them purely because they are a good debater and speak with them for just this reason, and not respect their humanity whatsoever, this would be a bad thing. Similarly, Nora is a great tabber, she has lots of rap. Me dating her means that I get more rap. This is great. If I only dated her for this reason, this would be pretty icky and you'd never accept it. Which is why we're not going to tell her that. Right. One of our things are the reasons why we care most about instrumentalization over anything else. Because I think that there are inherent rights and dignity that you get by virtue of being human. There is something special about being human that deserves respect. And this is why we generally say that a human is worth more than even an artificial intelligence that is equally as intelligent as a human and capable of doing all the same things as human, because we are human, so we recognize and respect something as being inherent to that. What you're going to judge this debate on then is instrumentalization, because in society, and this is the crucial way up against utility, we can never accept instrumentalization in society, but we can often accept compromising of utility. A couple of intuition pumps here and examples to get you thinking of this. 1. Slavery. Sometimes you could cause net utility gain for some people if you enslave one person. You can have a doctor slave who spends their entire life going around saving lots and lots of other people. We don't do this because we recognize that it is dehumanizing to put someone into indentured servitude, to dehumanize someone in this way to make them a slave. The response from God could be to say that maybe the utility way up is unclear here. Maybe actually that person does lose more utility. So we can step up from this, right? We can say, if you have the choice to put one child in a box and the child will suffer forever for eternity, but everyone else in that society will be happy forever, then that is always a net positive in utility, because you get eternal happiness for everyone else versus eternal suffering for that one individual. But we still think that this is negative, because someone's suffering has been turned into a currency. They've become a machine rather than a human. This is also importantly true, even if that child never knew any other world, even if this is all that there was for them, even if they lack any uncertainty, this is also the root of the weighing that we're going to come in against OO with. This also largely deals with the OG self and things like depression, etc. Right? So the depressed human is still a human. Someone who works 80 hours a week is still someone, and they still know that they are a person who has the capacity to be cared for and the capacity to be loved. But the point where you're instrumentalized into just being an object, what I'm about to prove that this person is, I think you lose that entirely. Why is this instrumentalization? First version, these are two different people. Parth makes this really easy by conceding in their speech that these are two different people. William also says this, so I think they're probably just like beholden to this, right? The fundamental reason here, if you want to scale this up, is that you are a person because of the experiences and memories that you have. You hold different memories, and you not only have those different experiences, but you also react differently to different stimuli, which means that the way in which you react to a different person. The only thing that really links you is your DNA. Two identical twins are obviously not the same person. Clearly, these are different people. The second more important burden here is to explain why this is instrumentalization. Because I do think that this is literally the slavery example, right? Notice what you are doing is you are separating this person into two people when they undergo the severance process. And you are choosing that one of those people is going to be on the outside world, one of those people is going to be on the inside world. Just experiencing work. Just experiencing, frankly, all the trauma that William tells you about. This clearly puts a preference on the non-worker. They get the joy and the fun of the outside work. World, etc. The worker then is literally a slave because they are generating income to be used by the person on the outside and they're being sacrificed for that. But beyond this, they have no agency over when they exist or when they go to work. They are fundamentally in prison because they only exist in their workspace. They only exist in their office building or hospital or whatever it is. And when they clock out, they cease to exist. And when that other person clocks in and chooses to go back to work, they exist, but they cannot leave the confines of that place because when they do, they cease to exist and another person takes their place instead. So you're not sacrificing that person's agency for any benefit to them, like when we're okay with the parent making their child eat their vegetables so it's in their best interest. But you are sacrificing their agency because you are saying that their agency does not matter and you're using it purely to service the other person, which is exactly what William does and which is exactly why that's not okay. Parth.
Right, let's get this going. Closed opposition is symmetric because many things violate your agency on your side and instrumentalize you, for example, being a cog in the capitalist machine.
Yeah.
Utility should be the metric that determines ground. So what's most certain is mental and psychological loads which affect people biologically, bringing that our agency violation is a more certain one because of biological imperatives that exist across all human beings.
Next person on my page. Why do I think that you do not meaningfully instrumentalize yourself when you go to work on government bench? And even if you do, then it's not nearly to the same extent. I.e., I was just about to get onto that, but thank you very much. Okay, so before this, I should note that you're not only instrumentalizing the person at work, though, but you're also instrumentalizing the original person as well, right? The original person literally fucking dies. Their memories get split in two. The skills that they need for work versus the people who they were maybe around when they learned those skills get split in two and put across different individuals. I think you're also instrumentalizing this person because fundamentally, as for the notion, this is like mandatory. This happens to everyone. This is universal, and so all people also get instrumentalized twice. Once before the severance, and then again for half that individual after the severance. Okay, why do I think that there is a comparative in this debate? A couple things. First of all, because on GovBench, I think that it is yourself who you are instrumentalizing, right? That is to say that the person on the outside cares for the person on the inside and sees them as a human being, because I fundamentally don't think that the average human being in the status quo sees their real self and their work self as two literal different people, one of whom can be abused to no end under the status quo because they will not remember it. Part of the other response to this is to say, but you're clogging the capitalist machine. I think this is true. I think that you're clogging the capitalist machine either way, and that part is symmetric. But I think there's something particularly pernicious about about being controlled by one other individual, and specifically that individual being the person who has chosen to create you, right? That is to say that you undergo the severance process, you choose to take that job, and you choose to take that job knowing that you get split in two, and so that person maybe is chosen, maybe they're not, because you believe that doesn't happen at the point where everyone has to undergo this, but the other distinction here is that they are entirely dependent on you. Any choice that you make on the outside world directly impacts them on the inside world. And notice that this is asymmetric, so that you have far more choices that you can take on the outside world than the inside world, because you have access to, like, when you're at work, a tiny office building, and when you're out of work, the literal entire rest of the fucking world. I think given this, they're dependent on you. If you eat a burger, that affects them. If you do anything else, that affects them as well. I think that you do not see this person as human. I think that William does not see this person as human. I think that's unfortunate. I also dedicate this speech toward that.
I thank the member of opposition for that kind of speech, and I invite the government with a debate for their side.
Deal with CO first, because I think they just really misconstrue this whole thing. Okay, turning people objects. So taking a working person's agency away by entrenching the professional activity within youth trauma is turning them into an object. But this is, for example, like you don't believe you can perform well in a professional environment because your parents didn't support you when you were young, or you can't stand up to your male boss because your partner is abusive at home. Like all of these things lead in and basically turn you into a professional object which is not able to function properly. As we remove these barriers, we let people make free decisions unencumbered by their prior trauma. Okay, the most dehumanizing aspect is the reduction of personal life, in the contrary to the to basically being an accessory of the professional world. Like for example, when you're at home worrying about what your boss thinks, feeling compelled to respond to emails like a machine within your spare time, being like forced to dwell on and dread a trade-off of time spent away from your family versus professional development. All of these things are what turn you into a machine, not having actually protected aspects of your life. Look, we know we have to work, but we don't have to subjugate our outside mind to professional machinery, nor our professional mind to our prior personal trauma, okay? We then even take this beyond into, for example, retirement, when we no longer want your identity to be linked to your professional activity and how you perceive your own success in the professional world or your self-worth. Like, you actually get possibly 2 or 3 decades at the end of your life where you no longer have to be concerned with any of that professional stress. You can just live basically a happy life. Look here, notice here we are creating 2 people with agency. We are creating your personal self and your working self. And we are giving both of those people greater opportunities because they are no longer in their personal life subjugated to professional stress, or within their professional life subjugated to personal trauma. There's just the intuition here. It's like if you were going to like have a child who, I don't know, maybe you thought they were going to experience some suffering in your life, you would still give them that opportunity because you know they have potential within their life to make the best go of it. Here we multiply that because now we have 2 independent agents which can each make the best of it in the scenario, and we engineer that. So principally we should do that. Not right now, thank you. Okay, on this point of like physical trauma and low sanitation and all this kind of stuff, like of course you can still store information and whistleblow. Like for example, there are companies working in regulation enforcement. You can transfer info out of your company during working hours. You can walk out of your office during your lunch break and go to the police and whistleblow. There is still data on who is employed, where they're employed, on their health situation, etc. to link up to where people are doing bad things. And if it is such a big issue, and given that this aspect of life has been around forever. There's probably institutional regulation around this, just as we have legislation to deal with shortcomings in the status quo. Like, when action is taken and it's confined to the workplace, at the very least, even if we resurrect these things, it no longer actually spills over into family life. Let me expand on this. So, for example, true punishment, as DLO concedes, should be confined to the workplace, as there are limitations on the decision-making process, i.e. sometimes you just have to make bad decisions, which can be criminalized, because you didn't have any option. Look, it's possible to be like a good father or a good mother who makes bad decisions in the workplace. What we allow is that it's better to remove someone from a position of authority than send them to jail. It's better to remove their professional qualifications than impact their home life. It's better to mandate lower level labour and repayment or reapportioning of profits, is recompense for a crime done without harming the innocents. It might be their family at home, right? We actually allow for the confinement of punishment within the professional environment, which is just better and more moral in a broader perspective without harming family life. Okay, now this weird extraneous point about when you think about your friends in the workplace, it makes you feel better. Not quite yet, in a second, let me just talk about it. Okay, I think thinking about the good work that you did yesterday in work helps. Thinking about your work friends who you enjoyed interacting with helps. Thinking about your lunch break that's coming up probably also helps. And I think as William analyzes, we tend to dwell on bad things more than good things. So if you're gonna, suppose you can think about your friends at home during work, you're probably gonna be dwelling on the argument you had with your partner last week, rather than on the nice coffee break you had with your friend the other day. So I think it's just better to have these things focused to a work environment where things are just generally more structured and you're less likely to have trauma just because of all the regulations around how people have to act in the workplace anyway. So if you're going to be dwelling on something, it's more likely you're going to be dwelling on something good that's within the workplace anyway. And I think the principle here is just if we can at least protect half of a person's hours and moreover once retired all of their hours, then I think we just should principally do that because we have this opportunity as decent human beings who want to minimize suffering and maximize people's potential.
Back half is a scam. Trauma and violence instrumentalize people, COs, and EPL extension. For you guys, memories exist on both sides. If maximizing memories maximizes agencies, we have the most complete set. And if having maximized good memories maximize agency, we win because of our argument about good memories.
Okay, memories do not maximize agency in and of themselves. They restrict you. They restrict you based on trauma. They tell you that you cannot do things because you don't believe in yourself because of something that happened when you were small. They tell you that, I have this bad memory, so I'm not even going to try. They tell you that, I can't work my best today in this environment because I'm worried about my sick mother back home, and there's actually a trade-off I'm going through with here. We make it so that, we know that people have to work there to support their families, but now they can do that without worrying about all the other trauma outside of all of those trade-offs. We're protecting them here, and that's what gives the opportunity and additional agency that you can make unencumbered choices. Okay. Okay, now, not final. Okay, on dreams and dread. Look, this point about you're going to get PTSD because you don't know what happened. Look, you know you were at work, when you wake up in the morning, you have been asleep, even though you have no memory of it. This doesn't upset our peace of mind. We don't get PTSD because we were asleep last night, okay? Bad dreams except to emerge from memory. If you have no memory of the work, you physically cannot have PTSD or dreams about it because there's no link within your brain to bring that within your subconscious, okay? That's just how it works. Maybe let's just suppose you do find sleep traumatic, but having to work while thinking about your child who was critically ill is just intuitively much, much worse than I don't know what happened last night kind of thing. We just don't dwell on this. On war crimes, I think William's right in that war crimes are just that's okay. War crimes are just usually structural things that you didn't have a choice if you had to do it or not. It's just what was various decisions. But let's just suppose for an instant that they are personally motivated. I think motivation of such crimes, e.g. racial crimes during war, etc., is largely driven by personal grievances and not from structured professional, environmental ones. Where it's quite difficult for people to overtly harm you personally in the workplace compared to in your personal life. So if we can actually separate these personal racial biases or whatever from your professional decision making, I think you're more likely to actually protect against people doing bad things in the heat of combat because they no longer have this visceral personal motivation to do that. They're actually acting in a professional environment. Because basically the decision making is now siloed. You can still influence your work, but if you know doing a war crime is going to harm your professional progression, your ability to keep that job, then in that professional environment and frame of mind, you're not going to do it, obviously. Okay. No, I'm not sure I have. Okay. I might just leave it there actually, because I think our case kind of just stands anyway.
I thank you, Dominique Wick, for that nice speech, and I invite the opposition Wick to finish up this debate and to start the competition as a whole. Yes.
these things. I'm really just skirmish. We said no one justified their metrics, so everyone threw about metrics really, really hard and really, really fast. So let's defend our metrics so that we can prove to you that comparatively the only thing you ought to ever weigh this debate on is instrumentalization and not agency or bodily autonomy or utility or any of these other things that I think are fundamentally wrong. Why does this matter? Per the judge manual, there is a way to judge the debate, and the way runs as follows. Number 1, if all teams explicitly agree on a metric, clearly not. Number 2, if all teams implicitly agree on a metric, clearly not. Number 3, metrics as they have been comparatively justified, which means whoever justifies their metric the best wins this debate really cleanly because no one other than top half has talked about the same thing. Alright, let's talk about why we think that instrumentalization is the most important thing. First, clarity on what it is. Instrumentalization is not using someone as a means to an end. Like Adam already told you in his speech, that is sometimes fine, and we sometimes think that it's acceptable to use someone as a means to an end. I think that it's completely fine to speak with Adam if my end is I'm going to try and win a competition. That's fine, and that's chill, because I still view Adam as a person. I am not treating him as a mere means to an end. I am treating him as a function, but not necessarily his value is inherently exclusively that function. What does this mean against, let's start with bodily autonomy. I think that the bodily autonomy is not actually, these things are fundamentally different things, although they might sound like the same thing. But we don't actually care about bodily autonomy. We care about you being valued as a person and valued as a human being. Bodily autonomy is part of instrumentalization, but it's not instrumentalization in and of itself. The intuition here is that what a subpoena does is it removes your bodily autonomy. You are forced to go to a particular court at a particular time. But we think that this subpoena is kind of fine. And the reason that we think it's fine is because you are not just the value that you are to that court, you are also a human being in the process. If a subpoena meant that you were going to get taken and locked up and gagged and only let out for the purpose of giving testimony up until that trial was over, that would be you being exclusively valued as an experience-giving machine, as a testimony-giving machine. That would be instrumentalization, and we would think that that is always bad. So clearly, sometimes we will compromise bodily autonomy, but we will never compromise instrumentalization, which means the metric of this debate cannot be bodily autonomy, it must be instrumentalization. Let's compare it directly against utility, which I think that Adam has already done, but I think that he got some degree of pushback on this. But I think that the thing is that utility has cases in which we are willing to sacrifice utility. Utility has cases in which you have your little doctor machine and your little doctor slave who is only valued as a doctor and not viewed as a human being, and therefore we think that that is bad, even though all of the things that are beneficial are happening, even though lives are being saved and there is infinitely positive utility. I think that in that case, because we are not willing to sacrifice instrumentalization directly at the expense of utility, it is clear that we are willing to prefer instrumentalization in that case. Let's talk about agency, which is the other word that's been thrown around. But the problem is that agency is the second part of instrumentalization. Instrumentalization is fundamentally the prerequisite to agency, and you cannot access agency without first accessing instrumentalization. The intuition pump here is that we think it's fine for a parent to force their child to eat vegetables. We think it's okay to take away their agency in that way, and we think that's totally chill. But the reason we think that's okay is because that parent is clearly still viewing their child as a person. They're clearly doing it for their child's benefit, therefore they value their child's inherent human rights and dignity. That's why we would think it's bad if a mother strapped her child to a chair and force-fed him vegetables for no particular reason other than she wanted to get the vegetables down his throat. We would think that was an act of cruelty and not an act of kindness, but we do think it's fine for them to force their child to eat vegetables in general. We think it's okay for you to be forced to sit there until you finish your vegetables because you are being viewed and valued as a person. The only thing that we care about in this world fundamentally is value as human beings. The only thing that we care about as people is making sure that people are inherently valued. Agency does not matter. Bodily autonomy does not matter. Utility does not matter. The only thing that matters is that human rights and dignity are being
respected, and it is fundamentally not being respected in this debate. On uniqueness, and why instrumentalization is unique, and why it is not happening, or at the very least, not happening to nearly a degree on their side of the house, because probably that's a fair challenge. Your workplace does instrumentalize you in the status quo. I think that is fair enough. Your workplace in and of itself does not view you as a human being, it views you as a component in a machine. But this is okay for 3 reasons. The first one is, a workplace is not a human, and we think that instrumentalization is bad whenever it is a human compromising another human's dignity. Note that all of my examples have been a human compromising another human's dignity. I think that intuitively this is true, but also it is practically true, because we just think that there is something inherent about humanity that means that like must recognize like, and you cannot compromise it ever. But secondarily, I think it's the obligation aspect that Adam has already explained to you. Your workplace does not hold a unique obligation to you. They are not like everything you do is not completely controlled by them. But the third one is, I think your workplace instrumentalizing you happens on both sides. But what does not happen on both sides is you instrumentalizing the other person who was you at one point. Double instrumentalization happens on their side of the house, which means that you double the amount of harm that is being done. Insofar as we have proven conclusively that this is a harm, I think that that is really, really clear. We've justified our metric, which means that we've weighed above our opening. We've differentiated from our opening. Finally, to respond to closing government. I think there's a really simple response here. 2. 1. Memory only exists in context. If I don't really remember my dreams, this is different from when I close my eyes and wake up and feel as though I didn't sleep at all. When I feel as though I didn't sleep at all, that's severance. There's zero memory. Then it increases the influence of the other memories that I have and increases the amount of power they have over me. I think that first this means that there's no real rescue from the burden of memory that's being provided by closing government at all. But maybe the interpretation is there are fewer different influences, and so this is chill and this is fine. But the problem is that if memory is always bad and coercive, fewer memories that are stronger means you have less choice between the things that are happening. So if your weighing is on your ability to make a choice, you have less of an ability to make this choice because these individual memories are more coercive and therefore stronger over you, which means you have less agency over all. The only thing that matters in this debate is instrumentalization. I think that a human should not be a machine.